I'm going to show how to make this moss effect using Affinity's procedural texture filter. I've been trying to make moss for a while, and although there are quite a few tutorials online, most of them are geared more towards a 3D modeling approach to moss. And I finally came up with this one, and I like it pretty well. It looks quite a bit like moss. So one of my first chores as a child was to go up into the swamps in northern Wisconsin, the cranberry bogs, and we would harvest sphagnum moss. So sphagnum moss is really good for packing the roots of trees and keeping them wet. And my parents ran a nursery, and so that was one of the things we did in the fall, was hike out into the woods after the frost, because then it wasn't so buggy, and go into the swamp and harvest sphagnum moss. So I got to know sphagnum moss pretty well, and so I would say I'm somewhat of an expert on moss. And although this pattern doesn't look exactly like moss, I think it passes pretty well for moss. To make this pattern, I'm using 3 different levels and then multiplying them together. The first level is to use some cell noise to create the overall shape of the moss, sort of rounded clumps of moss. The second pattern is to use cellnoise distance, and that creates these little fibrous areas here in the moss, like this little mesh network. And then the third pattern is to use some perlinsin and lay that over the top of the whole thing, just so it isn't so uniform and regular. It just sort of gives it sort of a fuzzy edge to it. And then finally, I make multiple copies of those and change the colors of them to give this sort of overall moss effect. To get started, I'll start Affinity and make sure it's in the pixel mode. I'll do a new document, and the one I'm going to use is the Legacy PC, and just set that to 1024 by 1024 pixels. It should be in RGB 8 mode. Create that document, and I'm going to fill it with black, and the fill tool is located, might be behind this one. I'm going to use the flood fill tool. I'll add a live procedural texture filter, and that applies it to the layer. I'll add a single equation and assign it to the 3 color channels, red, green, and blue. I'll add a real number input A, and I'll label that scale and set it equal to 4. First, I'll create a coordinate system. So that'll be a variable v equals a 2-element vector for the x and y coordinates, and I'll use the relative x and relative y, so that I'll be able to drag it with the mouse to reposition it, and then times a, my scaling factor, and I'll divide by h, the height of the document in pixels. So there is my coordinate system, and now I'm going to use the cell noise to make a pattern. It'll be v.x and v.y. You have to input those components separately in cell noise. Some functions you don't have to do it that way. This one you do. And I'll just put in 1, sort of the standard separation value for it. So there's my cell noise. Now this does not look exactly like little clumps of things. It looks like little valleys to me, and so I want the opposite of that, and I could do a 1 minus the cell noise, and there, now it looks sort of like clumps. But what I really want to do is use the smooth step function on this, and if I use smoothstepn, it'll turn it upside down and I'll get my clumps that way. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to apply the smooth stepn function, and I'm going to use 2 edges, E1 minus E2 divided by 2, so that'll sort of be the smoothing part, and then E1 will be the main edge, and then plus E2 over 2, and sometimes I divide it by 4, but because I want the edge to go as far out as possible, I'm going to divide it by 2. That should give me a full range at the full range of the scale. So now it doesn't show up, but if I add my two 0 to 1 sliders and label them E1 and E2, now I should be able to see my pattern. So there's my pattern, and if I bring edge 1 down, yeah, it looks like that, and if I bring edge 2 down, it makes these sort of rounded discs. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to be overlapping other stuff on top of this, and I'll probably spread this out a little bit, but then I can have these gaps in here. It'll make it look nice and clumpy. So that's my first texture, so I'm going to set that up as a variable. T1 equals all the rest of this. Now T2 is similar. The main difference will be it'll be at a different scale. And so I'm going to use cell noise distance this time. And it'll be v.x and v.y. And I'll just use 1 for that one too. So if I look at that, it looks like this. So I want to do a couple different things with this one. I want to change the scale, and I also want to put it into a smoothstepn. So I need to have a new scale. I'll choose B. Oh, I need to label these. This will be clump edge, and this will be clump smooth. And this will be fiber scale. So these are going to be my fibers. And then I need 2 of these, and I'll call it E3 and E4. E3 is my fiber edge, and E4 is my fiber smooth. And now I can wrap this in a smoothstepn with E3 minus E4 over 2 and E3 plus E4 over 2. And then I also want to multiply this by my scaling factor b. So it'll start out multiplied by a, and then I'll multiply again by b, times b and times b here. And closing parentheses. And I'll bring this down. So this one, just a little bit of edge on that. So I want sort of a network like that. This looks like sort of a sharp edge, and I want to smooth that off. And so there are a variety of different smooth step ends. One of them is sort of like the squared value. So if I look at SQ, it makes it even more pointy. So I sort of want the opposite of that, which is the SQI, where it's sort of rounded at the top, and then it goes to black. So I'm going to use that one. So it has sort of this rounded shape at the top. I could turn this maybe all the way down, almost all the way down, and just try to give it a little more, I don't know if that's much of a rounded appearance, but that's what I'm going to use. And then compared to the first pattern, I want this one to be smaller. So I increase my scale factor, and I get more of those. Now that I've got it set up, I'll set it to a variable, T2. And then the last one is going to be some Perlin noise, so I'll put that in as variable T3, and that's equal to Perlin. Just for fun, I'm going to use the perlinsin, which is sort of a smooth Perlin noise. And I'm going to have a separate scaling factor for this, so it'll be V times C. And then I'm going to use 10 octaves. I don't have to change that. And I'll use the smooth factor on this one like that. So I need to add a real number input C. This is my Perlin scale. And a 0 to 1 range input S. And this will be my Perlin smooth. I'd like to make this look sort of fuzzy. So In order to do that, I'm going to add turbulence to the scaling factor. So over here, I'm going to add a turbulence amount value times udirsc. So the u is unit directional noise. So it's a vector that each vector has a unit value but points in a random direction. And then sc interpolates between those to give it sort of an S curve, smooths it out in an S shape. Alright, and that one is based on V, but I want it to be relative to the Perlin scale, which is C, and then relative to even more, which is TS, so I'm going to call that. So that's my turbulence factor. I've got to add a 0 to 1 range input for the turbulence. And then a real number input, TS, for the turbulence scale. Okay, so that's very swirly, but I'll bring it down so it's just a little bit fuzzy. I just want it to look a little bit like fibers. So those are my three variables, and then I want one more factor. I'm going to add a 0 to 1 range input, I, for the overall intensity of this, so I can decrease the overall brightness. Okay, now I'm just going to multiply these all together. So I'll take I times T1 times T2 times T3. And let's take a look at that. So there's my overall factor. And I can't adjust the amount of each one really, but I can adjust the smoothness factor and the edge. So there are my little clumps. Now I think I want this to be, the clumps to be quite a bit bigger than my fibers. So I'm going to increase this quite a bit. So there are the little fibers in there inside my clumps of moss, and then add the smoothness, and then for the Perlin scale, I'm going to increase this quite a bit too. Make it a little smoother. I'm going to go in and look at these. So I want these to be roughed up quite a bit. Okay, so that's my basic MOS function. Now I want to add some color to this. And so I'm going to add 6 0 to 1 range inputs. So I'll have two different colors I can blend between. So red, green, and blue, and red, green, and blue again. And I'll label this one R1, G1, B1, name this one R2, G2, and B2, and then I'll add my labels. So over here, I'm going to take and multiply a 3-element vector, a vec3, for the color, and it'll be R1, G1, and B1. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to copy this whole thing and add on R1, R2, G2, B2, and times 1 minus I times T1, T2, T3. So those are my two different colors. And I forgot a parenthesis over here. Let's see, no, I don't need a parenthesis here. I need a multiplication times I. Let's try that. Okay, so to get started, I'll just turn this one to black. And then this one I'll make mostly green. And for a background, I want it sort of greenish too. Okay, and since this is my first level, I'm going to make multiple layers of this. And since this is the first one, I want my clump smoothness set up pretty far. So I want this to go over most of the area. And I can also add more edge to this. And then I think I want this to be, the fibers to be pretty small, even though the clumps are fairly big. Okay, so that looks pretty good for the first level. Now I'm going to duplicate this and move it over to a new position. I'm going to change the blending mode of this one to lighten, and then I'm going to adjust it a little bit. I think I'll make this one larger scale, so I don't think I want to change the clump size, but I'm going to change this to make these a little bit larger, and I think I want to bring down to make it a little clumpier, and I want to change the, looks pretty fuzzy, so I guess that's okay. And then I think the color a little bit, maybe be sort of careful when you're blending these. I don't think I need to blend that one. I think maybe I'll make it, try it brighter green. And then one more layer. So I'm going to duplicate this. And this, I'll have 3 layers total. And this one, I'm going to use soft light. And that's going to give it a shadowy effect, but I kind of like that. This one, move it over again. This one I'm going to add more. I'm going to increase the scale quite a bit, and then also increase this back up so it's pretty high. So maybe this is a different type of moss in here. That's just showing up once in a while. And this one, maybe I'll make it, take the red out, bring the intensity up a little. Like that. Now I think maybe on this first one, I'm going to go back and tweak these a little bit, so I don't want it quite so clumpy. See if I can fill in some of these gaps. Moving this around. Alright, so that's my moss effect. I think you could try maybe some different smoothstepn, sq, some of those different smooth steps that are out there. There's quite a few different ones. I think it might be worthwhile experimenting with some of those a little bit more. I just multiplied them together, but you could do something else, maybe average them or do some other manipulation on that. Anyway, if you come up with something really cool, let me know down in the comments, and let me know if you have any other comments or questions, and thanks for watching.